afternoon and good morning to those of you that are joining us from the West Coast. Thanks for joining us for our 8th installment of our Community Eligibility Provision webinar series. Today we will be talking about the administrative review process for LEAs that are electing CEP. My name is Ian Garrison, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Talitha Jordan and Pamela Barclay, both of whom will be leading today's discussion. So the slides for today's webinar are available in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. You may access them by clicking on the icon that looks like 3 pieces of paper. Today's webinar is also being recorded, and we plan to make this webinar along with the entire CEP webinar series to date available in the coming weeks on our website. We'll provide you with that website address a little later in the webcast when we talk about resources. So here's the information we'll be providing over the next hour. On today's webinar, we will talk about the purpose of the administrative review procedures and requirements, abbreviated review, technical assistance and corrective action, and fiscal action. Finally, we should have plenty of time at the conclusion of today's presentation to answer questions. But you don't have to hold your burning questions until the end. You may type your questions at any time in the Q&A tab located on the webinar toolbar at the top of your screen. We'll read the questions aloud and answer as many as we can before the top of the hour. So with that, I will hand it over to Talitha and Pam to dive into the administrative review for LEAs that are electing CEP.
Hello, everyone. My name is Talitha Jordan, and together with my colleague, Pamela Barclay, we will be reviewing how to monitor SFAs that have elected to implement the Community Eligibility Provision, also known as CEP. During today's webinar, we will be covering the steps required to monitor SFAs that operate CEP at some or all of their sites. To reduce administrative challenges, local education agencies and SFAs with a high percentage of free and reduced price certifications may elect to use a special provision option. Determining compliance with the requirements associated with each special provision option required some modification of the administrative review. Section 9 and the Special Provision Options module of the Administrative Review addresses those modifications. In addition to CEP, the other SPOs included in this module are Provision 1, Provision 2, Provision 3, and of course CEP. The requirements of the Administrative Review guidance apply to the review of an SFA's administration of SPOs. While administrative review activity typically occurs at the SFA district level, some aspects may also occur at the school or state agency level. For example, if the state agency applies the claiming percentages to the SFA's meal counts. It is imperative that all reviewers familiarize themselves with the current Administrative Review Manual in its entirety, as today's webinar will only cover a snapshot of the process. For this webinar, our focus will be on the CEP review procedures. This presentation will follow the guidance provided in the school year 14-15 Administrative Review Manual. This is the general outline of the order in which we will present the information. As we move through the presentation slides, our approach will be to cover the steps a reviewer would take, beginning with assessment and moving through to the latter part of the presentation, which will cover technical assistance, corrective action, and fiscal action. I will now pass over the presentation to my colleague, Pamela Barclay.
Thanks, Talitha. The first step after contacting the SFA under review is to select the individual sites that will be a part of the review. When the SFA under review is participating in the Community Eligibility Provision option, the SA must use normal site selection procedures. These procedures do not differ from those that you would follow when reviewing SFAs using standard meal counting and claiming. These procedures are detailed in Section 1, Pre-Visit Procedures under the Site Selection Procedures in the Administrative Review Manual. As a quick refresher, let's go through what these steps entail. So over in Step 1, the SA must obtain data from the SFA for all participating schools. This data must include the school name, the type of school, whether it's an elementary or secondary school, the number of serving days, the number of students eligible for free meals, and the number of free meals claimed for a month at the NSLP. Under Step 2, you're going to use the table provided in the Administrative Review Manual to determine the minimum number of schools that must be reviewed. For example, if the SFA under review has 11 to 20 schools, the minimum that must be selected for review is 3. Under Step 3, after determining the minimum number of schools to be reviewed, you can move on to using the required site selection criteria to select the school to be reviewed. For Step 4, if using the criteria we just talked about, the minimum number of schools has not been met, the SA must select additional schools using state agency established criteria. And then finally, there are a few other considerations for site selection, one of which has particular relevance to SFA's operating CEP. If the SFA has sites operating special provision options, including CEP, the school selection procedures do not result in a review of a school offering CEP, the SA must conduct an abbreviated review. This abbreviated review will be discussed in more detail later in this presentation. As you know, the new administrative review process includes both off-site and on-site components. As is detailed in the guidance, the only section of the administrative review that must be completed off-site is the Resource Management Indicator tool. With that said, the Administrative Review Manual does offer instructions for the completion of all sections utilizing the split off-site, on-site approach, and that's the approach that we're going to be walking through during this presentation. All reviewers should familiarize themselves with these questions that are in the guidance in preparation for reviews. For CEP, the off-site assessment tool includes special provision option questions. The SA must determine whether any adjustments to the ISP have been made since the latest ISP approval and whether the resulting claiming percentages are correct and properly applied. Again, the off-site assessment tool provides space and questions to lead to these responses. For CEP sites, a claiming percentage for free and paid meal categories is established and applied to both the school breakfast program and National School Lunch Program claims for reimbursement equally. However, the state agency must ensure for CEP sites that the school breakfast program and school lunch program meal counts are not combined when applying the free and paid meal counting claiming percentages to the monthly claims for reimbursement. This means that the breakfast and lunch meal counts should still be recorded and reported separately, even if the school is operating CEP. Students attending a school participating in CEP are to be excluded from the certification and benefit issuance review. This is of particular relevance to SFAs where CEP is being implemented on a site-by-site basis rather than being implemented SFA-wide. After excluding these students, reviewers should either use a statistically valid sample or 100% certification and benefit issuance review to complete the administrative review. We're going to move on now from the off-site assessment tool to talk about the on-site review activities. There are a series of activities that need to be completed for CEP sites selected for review. These include validating information captured on the off-site assessment tool, conducting a review of certification and benefit issuance, validating claiming percentages, record keeping, completing all the other critical and general areas of review, and recording the findings. We're going to now walk through each of these steps. So step one is to validate the information from the off-site assessment tool. You're going to validate the information from the SFA that was received during the completion of the tool. You'll ensure that the procedures described on the completion of the tool match what's actually occurring on site. You would then proceed with the certification and benefit issuance review, following the procedures set forth in the Administrative Review Manual with several adjustments. For CEP schools, the SA must review the certification documentation used to determine the ISP and claiming percentages that were submitted for the latest ISP approval to operate the community eligibility provision. The certification documentation may include direct certification lists, documentation for extensions of eligibility, and lists from homeless and migrant liaisons. The documentation required to evaluate the ISP comes from the April 1st certification documentation used to establish the claiming percentages in the current school year. The identified students are the number of students approved as eligible for free meals and are not subject to verification. This definition includes students directly certified through SNAP, TANF, and FVPIR participation, as well as homeless students on the liaison list, Head Start, pre-K even start, migrant youth, runaways, and non-applicants approved by local officials identified through means other than an application. Foster children certified through means other than an application are also included, as well as students certified for free meals based on the letter provided by the household from the SNAP agency. Students who are categorically eligible based on information such as a case number submitted through a free and reduced price application are not included on those direct certification lists. The certification documentation review must include obtaining the list of all students used to derive the ISP and selecting a minimum of 10 or a maximum of 10% of student names at random to verify that those students can be found on source documentation that certifies free eligibility. If more than 20% of the randomly selected sample cannot be properly verified in source documentation, the SFA must be required as a part of their corrective action plan to provide source documentation for every student used to establish the free claiming percentage. Now we're going to move on to step 3, which is validating the claiming percentages. If a CEP school is under review, the state agency must validate the accuracy of the ISP and the claiming percentage is calculated for free and paid meals. At a minimum, the state agency must verify that the claiming percentage identified from the last ISP approval was properly applied to the review period and month of the on-site review from the current school year. The state agency may complete the validation of the ISP and claiming percentages as a part of the off-site assessment. The next 2 slides will cover the steps needed to validate resulting claiming percentages. So the SFA 2A is a form that's used to validate the ISP and claiming percentages. So we're going to walk through an example of what this math looks like. The formulas are right there in front of you. So the SFA under review should be able to demonstrate to you as a reviewer that the process is sufficient in enough detail for you to be able to check their calculations and validate the claiming percentages and meals claimed during an administrative review. As you can see in this example, you're able to start with calculating and verifying the identified student percentage, and then using that ISP to calculate the free claiming percentage, and then applying that free claiming percentage to identify what meal should be claimed at the free rate and which meal should be claimed as a paid rate. And again, this math should be able to be demonstrated clearly enough to you through their forms or through the process that's used by the SFA for you to follow this chain of logic. Moving on to step 4, this is record keeping. As a reviewer, it's important to understand that LEAs must retain those records used in the development of the ISP. So this includes records for the initial approval year and all records from the year any updates are made to the ISP. And these should be kept during the entire period that CEP is in effect, including all extensions. In addition, this documentation and all other documentation must be retained for 3 years after the submission of the final claim for reimbursement for the last fiscal year of CEP. Step 5 includes reviewing all other critical and general areas for review covered under the administrative review. So don't forget, even if an SFA has elected and is operating under the CEP, both critical and general areas of review as part of the administrative review must be required for review. So you must complete all required forms as specified by the manual. These areas include, but are not limited to, meal components and quantities, resource management, food safety, other child nutrition programs such as Seamless Summer or Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, and civil rights. Again, these are detailed in the Administrative Review Manual. Next, we're going to return our focus to how CEP relates to the Administrative Review by discussing the forms that are particularly relevant. So there are a number of forms with relevance to CEP that must be completed as applicable during an administrative review. These include portions of the off-site assessment tool, portions of the on-site assessment tool. The S1 is used to record all special provision option site data. The SFA 1A is used to record all special provision option and SFA state agency validated claiming percentages. And again, using the Fiscal Action Workbook, there is tabs in the Fiscal Action Workbook as it's all compiled into a single workbook now that includes space for CEP and Special Provision Option schools. Make sure that you have all forms completed for all applicable sections of the administrative review. This is imperative for state record-keeping requirements. Before we move on to talking about technical assistance and corrective action, we're going to take a step back and talk about conducting an abbreviated review. As mentioned earlier, when we were talking about site selection, if the school selection procedures do not result in the review of a special provision option in a non-base year, you must select at least one site per SPO type, in our case, CEP, and conduct an abbreviated review of the application of claiming percentages for the review period at a minimum. So when conducting site selection for SFAs with a combination of sites operating one or more special provisions, along with standard meal counting and claiming sites, and only one site is required by the site selection procedures, the state agency must select the standard meal counting and claiming site to conduct the full administrative review. With that said, an abbreviated review would need to be required for the special provision site, again, in our case, CEP. In an abbreviated review for CEP, only the meal counting and claiming system will be reviewed to verify that the claiming percentages determined by the latest ISP approval were applied correctly to the current monthly claim for reimbursement. The state agency must also verify the correct documentation, as in the appropriate homeless list, the migrant list, or the applicable direct certification list has been used for calculating the ISP and claiming percentages. This review does not include validating the accuracy of the ISP. If violations to the application of the claiming percentages are identified from this abbreviated review, the SFA will be required as a part of its corrective action plan to correct the deficiencies identified at the non-compliant sites and submit documentation for every CEP site showing that the claiming percentages calculated during the latest ISP approval are applied correctly in the current school year for every closed claim for reimbursement. When there are issues of severe noncompliance that are identified during an abbreviated review, it's strongly encouraged that the state agency conducts a full on-site administrative review for the noncompliant sites. Again, the abbreviated review can be conducted as a part of the off-site portion of the review. Now that we've covered the steps for assessing compliance during an administrative review of an SFA operating the CEP, I'm going to hand it over to Talitha to discuss the technical assistance, corrective action, and fiscal action components.
Thank you. As Pamela just shared, we will now move forward on to technical assistance and corrective action, which is a critical role of the administrative review process. It is the state agency's role to ensure that the SFA understands the importance of operating all aspects of the SPO in compliance with FNS requirements while providing the SFA with detailed corrective action plans that will ensure compliance with those requirements. The SA should also encourage the SFA to participate in any SPO training opportunities that may be available. Technical assistance must be provided and corrective action is required as specified in the Administrative Review Manual and as described in the Special Provisions Options module. Corrective action must be applied SFA-wide for all violations at reviewed and non-reviewed sites if applicable. For all other review area errors, the SA should ensure corrective action is implemented as applicable for the type of error identified. In the following slides, we will cover technical assistance and corrective action as it applies to certification documentation review, meal counting and claiming, and all other review areas. During the certification documentation review, if more than 20% of the randomly selected sample cannot be properly verified on source documentation, the SFA must be required as part of their corrective action plan to provide source documentation for every student used to establish the free claiming percentages. Additionally, documentation must be submitted showing the claiming percentages calculated during the latest ISP approval are applied correctly for every submitted claim for reimbursement from from the current school year in which the review occurs. When meal counting and claiming procedures are identified as yielding erroneous total meal counts or meal counts by category, the SA must require full or partial recalculation as applicable to the degree of violation identified. Systemic errors that equal full recalculation require that the SFA return to standard meal counting and claiming methods and apply to select CEP in subsequent school years if qualified. Again, for all other review area errors, the SA should ensure corrective action is implemented as applicable for the type of error identified. This information can be found in the current Administrative Review Manual. Now moving on to fiscal action. Fiscal action must be assessed for all parts of the review, including those that relate to CEP as specified in the Administrative Review Manual. The SA must also observe the following. Fiscal action is required for review and non-reviewed sites for all submitted claims for reimbursement from the current school year. For situations where multiple SPOs are being operated in the sites being reviewed, SAs must ensure that a separate fiscal action workbook is completed for each SPO being used, consolidating and recording only the data from each particular SPO site. For schools operating CEP, as CEP sites are not included in the certification and benefit issuance review, any certification errors identified during the administrative review will not be applied to CEP sites for the calculation of fiscal action. SAs must complete the Fiscal Action Workbook tab specific to CEP for CEP sites selected for review. This slide is an example of one of those forms. This is the CEP lunch workbook. When ISPs under CEP are not retained as required, the state agency may, at its discretion, disallow some or all meals served at each site that fail to maintain all required documentation. And that concludes our presentation at this point.
All right, thank you, Talitha and Pam. So at this time, if you have any questions, you may type them into the Q&A tool located at the top of your screen. So while you guys are doing that, this slide lists our website where you'll find our community eligibility resources. We have several resources available, including our updated CEP guidance and Q&As, which address policy questions related to the administrative review for LEAs electing CEP. Our updated guidance also provides a link to Section 9 of the USDA Administrative Review Manual, which offers detailed information on the administrative review process as it pertains to CEP schools. As I mentioned at the start of today's webinar, we are currently in the process of making our complete CEP webinar series available on our website, but you can access our May 20th and April 17th CEP webinars on state and local education funding and outreach to eligible school districts on the Food Research and Action Center's website at www.frac.org. So now we'll answer some of your questions that you've submitted. Again, if you have a question, you may type your question now into the Q&A tab located on the webinar toolbar at the top of your screen.
One question that came in was, what is SPO? SPO stands for Special Provision Options. Special Provision Options would include Provisions 1, Provision 2, Provision 3, and CEP.
The second question that was asked regarded rounding in the ISP. And the reason that it looks like it only went to 3 in this case is because I was dividing a number by 1,000. So the fourth decimal place is actually a 0, so it would be 0.520. So when you're actually, which would actually, when you're rounding to the third, which would be 0.542, which is 54.2%. So that is the reason that it appeared that I only rounded to 3 when there is actually 4. It's just the fourth is a 0. When you're calculating on your own, you would indeed round to 4 decimal places when calculating the ISP. Okay, the next question we received is the letter we received indicates that we would be contacted prior to the review in order for you to collect more information. Our review is next week, and we have not yet been contacted.
This question actually sounds like it's coming from an SFA. If this is the case, you should contact your state agency to follow up on the letter.
Next question is, how do I get a copy of the PowerPoint? If you, the handout is available, the PowerPoint in PDF form is available in the top right-hand corner of your screen. The icon looks like 3 pieces of paper. If you click on that, you can download the slides there.
So, sort of a question, but one of the slides mentioned extensions, and that's guidance for special provision options in general. However, we did want to clarify that there are no extensions for CEP in the same sense that there are for provisions 2 and 3. You cannot use the same ISP for a period longer than 4 years. Of course, that doesn't mean you have to stop using CEP. It just means that at minimum you must update your ISP at least once every 4 years. We did want to clarify that.
So there was a question surrounding question 2109 on the off-site assessment tool, asking what that might look like if the state agency is completing the off-site assessment portion of this. The question is, are non-federal funds being properly allocated to account for the difference of offering all school meals to students at no cost? So if you're operating CEP and you're not being able to claim 100% of your students free and having to have some that are being reimbursed at the paid rate, what the state agency would be looking for is documentation that non-federal funds are being attributed to the nonprofit school food service account to cover those remaining paid students and the price and the costs associated with providing them meals at no cost to them. So they would be looking for some sort of documentation that goes along those lines. It's up to the state agency to request certain documents. Some of them will ask for different things. Generally, it's some sort of accounting record that tracks the transfer of those funds into the account. We had a question asking for more detail on the abbreviated review. The review is detailed in the Administrative Review Manual, starting on page 249. If you'd like to actually read that, I'm not sure exactly what additional detail you're looking for. If there are very specific questions regarding that, but essentially, you're going to be reviewing the meal counting and claiming system only. So you're going to be verifying that the correct documentation was used. You're going to be verifying that those percentages that were identified from the ISP are being applied correctly. And then if you are, during that process, identifying other areas of major concern or areas of issue with that application, then you would actually move to a full administrative review from there. The next question we received: if the program is on CEP, that's on CEP is self-sufficient, does the general fund have to transfer money?
Unless they are claiming 100% free for CEP, the expectation would be that they would need to transfer money from the general fund to the nonprofit food service account to cover the cost of the students at the paid reimbursement rate.
We got a question about rounding the ISP. The ISP, when you are calculating it, you do not round. You just go out 2 decimal places, past the percentage, or you just do a 4 decimal places total. And so, an ISP of 39.98, you cannot round it up. That is not eligible. The calculation is what it is.
We had a question requesting where the administrative review manual can be found. You have to go through PartnerWeb to find the manual, or contact your state agency to get a copy.
We had a question regarding record-keeping requirements. Our requirements are that the documentation be kept for 3 years after the last claim has been submitted, and that's for any type of school, private, charter, or public. If your state's or your area's requirements for record-keeping are different or more stringent, then you should be following whatever regulations or requirements you need to for your state or your district. Ours are 3 years minimum. Some people do keep them longer, but again, it's 3 years for our requirement. Read the question again. The next question we received was, when reviewing the certification documentation, will the reviewer validate the name, student ID, and other information required during direct certification for CEP? So when a reviewer is validating or determining that, they will actually be looking at the student's name to make sure that that student's name shows up on one of the ISP documentation sources. So it could be the direct cert list, it could be the migrant or homeless student list, it just depends. But they will be looking to verify that that student's name shows up on one of those lists that documents that the student is eligible for free meals.
Hi, we were asked to repeat the response to the question regarding general funds. If you are claiming under 100% free for your CEP rate, you do have to transfer funds from a non-federal source to cover the cost of the students being reimbursed at the paid rate.
So there was a question regarding if a district has all sites being CEP except for one, which is a high school, which is under standard meal counting and claiming, and they are only required to review one school based on the number of schools in the SFA. They would have to do the full administrative review for the standard meal counting and claiming site, and they would have to pick one of the CEP sites in order to do an abbreviated review on that site. And again, if the abbreviated review showed that there was significant errors, the state agency can elect to do the full administrative review at that site as well. The next question we received was, if an SFA has both CEP and non-CEP schools, can the state agency use discretion in picking the CEP school for review if felt necessary rather than a standard counting and claiming school? Otherwise, the CEP school would have never been picked. And in our situation, the CEP school operated multiple child nutrition programs. If only one site is being selected for review, then the standard meal counting and claiming site would have to be the one that was selected for full administrative review, and an abbreviated review could be conducted at the CEP site. Again, if there are issues that are identified during that abbreviated review, the state agency has the discretion to do a full administrative review as well. Now, if there are more than one site being selected as a part of site selection, then you should be selecting your at least one site that is a special provision option. In this case, if they're only offering CEP and standard meal counting and claiming, then if they were selecting two sites, then one of those sites should be a CEP site to account for that requirement.
Hello, we were just asked to clarify regarding non-federal sources in relationship to question 45 on the most recent CEP Q&As. The question 45 is, when are non-federal sources necessary when operating CEP? The response was, when the level of federal reimbursement received under CEP is less than the cost of providing all students in free meals, which in our previous response we referred to as having a CEP free claiming percentage of less than 100%. So as with standard operating procedures, anytime the level of federal reimbursement is less than the cost of providing meals, you would have to the SFA would have to cover the cost with non-federal sources. So again, if your CEP free claiming percentage is less than 100%, which is less than the cost of providing all students free meals, you would have to cover the cost of the students not receiving of free meals of non-federal sources.
Just to clarify, it's an absolute. The non-federal sources kicks in basically whenever your revenues aren't covering costs, and so just to clarify, even if your claim percentage is not 100%, if you still have adequate revenue stream coming in, you wouldn't be subjected to the non-federal requirement. We just wanted to clarify that it's an absolute. There's no line in the sand.
So the next question we received is a cash balance from the year prior to beginning CEP allowed to be used to cover the paid meal price, or is this considered federal funds? Once funds are in the nonprofit school food service account, they are considered to be treated as federal funds. So in that case, the balance would not be able to be used for those purposes. We had a question asking about a la carte sales to cover those costs. Again, as long as the money is not in the nonprofit school food service account, it's then considered to be treated as federal dollars, then the funds just need to come from a non-federal source. So it looks like we were able to get through majority of our questions. I know we only have a few more minutes before the conclusion of this webinar. I don't see any more questions coming in, so we're going to go ahead and kind of wrap things up. If you do have additional questions, I'm advancing the slide to get to our contact page here. So as a reminder, you can send your questions related to the administrative review process for all schools, including CEP schools, as well as all CEP-related questions to the school programs mailbox at schoolprograms@fns.usda.gov. For your emailed questions related to the administrative review in CEP schools, please feel free to also include both Talitha and Pam. Any questions that we weren't able to get to today on today's call, we'll go ahead and carry this forward to the next round of questions and answers that will be coming out and being issued for the administrative review. Great. So please join us next month on June 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for our 9th installment in our CEP webinar series, where we will be highlighting successful implementation strategies. Connection information is forthcoming via PartnerWeb or your state agency. We hope you all will be able to join us. So that concludes today's webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day.